So thanks so much for listening to Fire Breathing Rob. If you're listening to us on the YouTube or one of the podcasts, Apple, Amazon, or Spotify, we thank you. Please subscribe, like, and share this interview. We just had Tom Steyer on. That was a great interview. We're going back into the political realm with somebody that I've become fond of. I voted for her back in 2010, and unfortunately, she lost a close race to person that I'm not going to call him names, but unfortunately he's our senator now, and he's really a terrible candidate, a terrible person in my mind personally. But this is Alex Sink, and Alex was part of, and I want to talk about this in general too, Alex. You were part of a power couple as far as you and your late husband in the state of Florida, both running for governor, and really, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, in that Tampa Bay area, you guys really ran things. But first of all, Alex, thanks so much for coming on. I greatly appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Rob. It's great to be with you, and I'm just so happy that you're communicating and spreading the word around to people who are paying attention to what's going on.
Can you talk about, being that power couple in Democratic politics for such a long time with you and your husband?
Well, sure.
Okay.
I think that we were a part of the baby boomer generation,
Right.
and we found ourselves in that generation, which are many of your listeners' parents, actually. We were the big bulge population post World War II, and so there were a lot of us. There were a lot of baby boomers, and when we got, and not so many people in the generation ahead of us. So when we got to be in our 30s, Rob, we had many opportunities for leadership. We were coming, right off the Vietnam War demonstrations. My husband, actually, I can see that if you can see me behind me, some of his medals are hanging up on the wall. But we had lots of leadership opportunities when we were in our 30s. And let's just fast forward and say that I truly believe that the way out of our issues and our problems that we have now is for you and your generation to assume your rightful position in your 30s as leaders and influencers. And I'm seeing people like Anna Eskamani that you mentioned, and many others who are learning how to use digital media, social media, doing podcasts like you are. And my greatest hope and thought is to support you. But the things that my late husband and I were doing as leaders were, we were living our democratic values. And what our values were, that character and integrity are really important. That's not to say that some Republicans believe in character and integrity, but that caring about the well-being of other people is really important, not being selfish, and just making contributions to our communities wherever we could. And I'm just so encouraged that you and many other millennials are very engaged in the same kinds of ideas, particularly around climate change in a state like Florida.
My question to you is, why run for political office? You had a great career in banking, and obviously you did extremely well in that. And then you go into this dumpster fire of politics in general, and you won a great race as CFO back in 2006.
Yeah.
So why did you want to go into that in general?
Well, I've always, since the time, I remember sitting on my mother's knee back in the dark ages, listening to Democratic conventions on television in the early days of TV. And my mother particularly was always just interested in politics, and I was interested in politics, and never, ever thought I would ever run for office, because I'm kind of a math nerd. And I just didn't see, I didn't major in political science or want to be a lawyer, or I was just a math nerd, and became a banker here in the state of Florida, leading the state's largest bank. But what happened, Rob, was because life is a journey, and there are many paths you can take. And after I took an early retirement from banking, my friend Betty Castor, who at that time was the only statewide elected Democratic woman, she had served as education commissioner, called me up one day and said, Alex, the state has been reorganized. There are new cabinet positions. There's one cabinet position that used to be state treasurer or state comptroller. They've combined these two positions into one. It's going to be called chief financial officer. And the current person, Tom Gallagher, is running for governor. So it was an open seat. And so she said, you have the perfect background and experience to run for this office of chief financial officer. And I thought, okay, I had just come through my late husband's Bill's governor's campaign against Jeb Bush. So I got to see a lot about politics kind of from the inside out. So I knew a lot more about what might be involved. But Rob, the answer is I wanted the job. And I just truly believe that if you're going to run for office, it's not finding an office that pays a lot of money or gives you certain perks. It's a job, it's work, and you want to accomplish things. And when I thought about this position of CFO, I had this strong banking background. I was the chair of the board of the Nature Conservancy here in Florida. There are a lot of environmental issues. You know, anything that has to do with finance, you could get involved in. And so then I had to evaluate, you know, do I want the job? Number one. Number two, how does my family feel about it? Because I had middle school children at the time, high school children at the time. And number three, can I win the race? Because I'm going to have to go out and raise some, I didn't have my own money to spend. So I was going to have to go out and raise the money and convince people that they would make an investment in my campaign and that there was a path to victory. And there was yes to all three of those questions. And even though no Democrat had been elected at that point in time for 8 years, and I called some prominent Democrats, they said, Alex, you're great. You'd be a great candidate, but we don't think a Democrat can win again in this state. So I proved them wrong.
Well, we're thankful you did.
There's nothing Republican or Democrat about managing the state's money and caring about the taxpayers and accountability. And I ended up running against the Republican opponent, had a lot of legislative experience, but by profession, he was a small home builder. And I just kind of ran in my resume and convinced the people of Florida that we needed somebody who understood finances. And I'll just quickly summarize by saying, sure enough, when we got into 2007 to 11, it was the Great Recession, and the financial markets were crashing and burning. And oftentimes I thought, if I, with my experience and the team that I had around me, who were also very experienced finance and banking people, had not been there, the state would have been in much, much, much worse shape.
Right. I agree with that 100%.
I got into politics because I wanted the job. And then, of course, I ran for governor 4 years later.
Right. So we'll talk about that. Governor. Say again? Sorry.
I said I wanted that job too.
Can you go back to 2010 and talk about that race against Rick Scott?
Sure. Well, you have a good memory because sometimes we forget about the fact that there was the Tea Party wave.
Yeah.
You know, we don't even talk about the Tea Party anymore, but that's the Tea Party wave brought Marco Rubio into office. And Rick Scott, first of all, he was unknown. He had only lived in the state barely enough time to run for office, I think 7 years. And he got into the primary against Bill McCollum. And, you know, the establishment Republicans weren't even thinking about this guy. Nobody even knew who he was, except that my consultants from Washington said, we better watch out for this guy because he has a lot of money. And so that race in that primary was very close, but Rick Scott prevailed. And, you know, we knew that was going to be a problem because, as it turns out, Rob, he's put $75 million of his own money into the race, plus the Republicans put in maybe another $25 million. So it's $100 million against my 40. That can't win.
Right.
And my 40 was a record for any Democrat. But I have to give his team credit. And to this day, he is very good at identifying what the hot button issues can be and are, and he puts money behind it. And fast forward, when he was running for re-election, I told Charlie Crist, I said, just mark my words, the last 2 or 3 weeks of the election period, he's going to be behind you because you're such a better candidate and a better person and more reflective of Florida. But he's going to pour probably $10 or $15 million into the last 3 weeks of the race, doing nothing but running negative campaign ads, and they work. So he's, he was quite the force to run against, for sure, because his platform was mainly not about him or his vision, or he came up with to his credit, he came up with some clever taglines. Let's get to work. I still remember what they were. And he won the race in a squeaker, and then he same playbook. And I think, Rob, one of the things when I've started this interview out talking about character and integrity and accountability and truth, it was told to me that some people approached Rick Scott about some of the untruths that he was telling about me. And his response was, it doesn't matter. We can say anything we want to, whatever works. The truth doesn't matter. This is politics. Yeah. And, little did we know that was just a precursor for what we've seen with Donald Trump, with it's the Republican playbook, basically. And it's hard for us as Democrats to fight against that, because every ad I put out had to be, my consultants had to justify and cite the facts. And, at the end of the day, it didn't matter, unfortunately.
My thing was this guy, and this is what I'm going back to this, 2010, 2014, was this guy committed fraud. This guy was a criminal. Mm-hmm. And there's 2 good candidates, yourself and Charlie Crist, that ran against them. And they go for this guy that, in my mind, is a fraud. And all these senior citizens that live in Florida, that he ruined some of these people's lives. I don't understand it, but that's me. But anyways, that's the past. But it's just sad, really, of what went on. But and for everybody that's listening, again, this is Alex Sink, former CFO of the state of Florida. Alex, I want to go into this. We saw in 2016 the playbook of Donald J. Trump and the misogynistic and the sexist, terms that he used against Hillary Clinton. Running as a woman, can you talk about the differences that women face compared to men? Because I believe there's a lot of differences, and it really is hard on women candidates to even show emotion in general.
You're right about that. And I recall we've had very few women governors in this country. Florida's never had a woman governor. Obviously, we've never had a woman president, albeit, you could argue we've come pretty close, at least now in the last few years. I think people are feeling more and more comfortable with women in elected positions, but there is a difference, Rob, between an executive role versus a legislative role. And it's easier, the polls and the focus groups have shown that people are still more accepting of a woman in more of a legislative role, which is more collaborative body, not making individual decisions, than perhaps they are seeing women as governors and mayors. Although that's really beginning to change. I mean, how many women mayors have we seen take the lead in the COVID pandemic or in the Black Lives Matter movement? And I'm very hopeful about that experience of people seeing women as executive leaders. But when I was running for governor, there was a lot of a lot of advice given to me that I shouldn't be showing emotion, or I had to always be kind of the buttoned up executive type. Well, let me tell you a little story. After the election, I was in the Tampa airport and some random man approached me and said, "Aren't you Alex Sink?" And I said, "Yes, nice to meet you." And we carry on a little conversation for 3 or 4 minutes. And he said, "Well, I've got to go catch my plane, but obviously I didn't vote for you. But if I had had this conversation with you, I would have voted for you. If I had known this is what you were really like." And so I think that's one of the problems that we as women have is how do we show our humanity and kind of the emotional side and of who we are as women, and exude warmth and caring, but at the same time assure people that we can be decisive and make good decisions on the behalf of people.
I believe
Does
that's
that
what
make
they told.
sense?
Yeah, no, I agree with that because I believe I read quite a few books about the 2016 campaign, and
Mhm.
I believe that's what they told Hillary. And they had
Mhm.
people that they interviewed, and she said, if you had her, behind the scenes, if you were talking to her behind the scenes,
Right.
she was funny and stuff like that. But on stage she was kind of stiff, and she had to be strong and stuff, and she didn't let out her personality. So, I agree with you on that. People just want to vote for the natural person. They don't want like the
Mhm.
fake person. And I think a lot of new candidates hopefully are taking that as perspective in general. I want to keep moving on to the interview as we finish and go more into the state of Florida with the last 2 questions before we go into that area of Florida and what's going on right now with the Democratic Party. And we've seen a lot of trouble in 2020, but we'll go into that in just a second. Can you talk about your greatest accomplishments as CFO?
Sure. Uh, and there were I was going over some archives the other day. There were many, a lot of which the everyday person may not have seen, but one of which I previously mentioned is the state was had a lot of financial challenges, particularly with our investments and with the pension fund and the management of the fact that the budgets were declining. And we had as the state treasurer, we were paying very close attention, and we were able to move around some of our investments and save the state literally tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars just through financial engineering. And of course, the everyday person is not going to see that. But for me, as a financial person, and understand how important it is for our state to be in a financially sound position, that was a great accomplishment. Another one was, which was more in the public eye, was that I was one of the 4 people sitting on the state clemency board. And so Charlie Crist, when he ran for governor, had mentioned that he thought that we should address the restoration of civil rights for people who had completed their sentences. And, later on, as you will recall, the people of Florida passed a constitutional amendment overwhelmingly to restore civil rights. But when we were there, we realized that we could change some of the rules of the parole commission to permit to expedite more people achieving the right to vote. And Charlie Crist, as governor, brought it up, but he was going to have 2 more votes out of the 3 cabinet members. And we knew that Bill McCollum would not vote for it because he was the attorney general at the time. And so the fact that I was sitting there as a Democrat and was a vote for the restoration of civil rights, as a result, I believe it's 150,000 Floridians got the right to vote. So I view that the fact that I was the sole Democrat and I was able to align myself and work with Republicans in a bipartisan way on many, many different issues, made a real difference for hundreds of thousands of people. And I would say the third thing was that as working in the insurance field, we saw a lot of elderly people were victims of scams. And we successfully got legislation passed to criminalize these fraudulent insurance agents that were out selling annuity products and inappropriate things to seniors, basically leaving some of them destitute. And so just all the legislation we worked on to protect people. We expanded the children's health insurance, the SCHIP program called Florida Healthy Kids. I was the chair of the board. We totally revamped the Healthy Kids program and enabled hundreds of thousands of more children to be eligible for access to affordable health care. And this was, before the days of Obamacare. So I could kind of go on and on and on, but those are three things that are top of mind. Is that good?
Yeah, no, that's great. I have 4 questions left to move toward the end of the interview, because I want to talk about this with Florida and get your opinion on this. So Trump won Florida in 2016 by 112,000 votes. And then 2020, we know what happened in Miami-Dade, where Biden did win that county. I think it was like 53-46 or something to that effect. But, still, it was very close.
Not by enough.
Yeah, not by enough. And then obviously Trump won Florida by 371,000.
Yeah.
Do you feel like Florida, as far as the presidential realm, is really moving? You can even say this, I guess, for the governor's race and the Senate races too, that Florida is moving more toward the Republican, like a solid Republican state, especially with Trump now living here. We have 3 people that, right now the governor, and we'll see what happens in his election race in 2022, but Governor Desantis, Marco Rubio, and also Rick Scott might run for president, if their master Donald J. Trump doesn't run.
Well, the stats would tell you that, we're still a swing state because these races are being won within a margin of, 1 to 3 points.
Right.
So that would clarify that we are still a so-called swing state. However, after this last election, it does feel like, I think we're leaning a little bit more Republican, but we're not outside that margin of still a competitive swing state. And I truly believe, actually, Val Demings, who's the U.S. Senate candidate, was right here in this room yesterday with me. Wow. And she happened to be over here in Tampa looking at the issues of the red tide.
Yeah.
I think she can win this race.
I hope you're right.
So we have as long as we have a great candidate and a weak senator. I can't tell you, I'm pretty savvy politically, as you said. I can't tell you how many times Marco Rubio has ever even been to Tampa in the last 11 years. I mean, he's non-existent. And so I'm very hopeful that we'll continue to be very competitive. But Rob, what we as Democrats need to do is we lost the voter registration battle last year because COVID came and we just quit knocking on doors, getting people registered, and that came back to bite us. Right. So we can turn that around, voter registration, and then it's who gets the most votes. And Lord knows that legislature is trying to pass all sorts of voter suppression legislation, but we're tough Democrats. We're going to get out there and say, don't take my vote away. I don't care what barriers you put up. I'm going to jump over them. So if we can get our local parties organized, and we get to see a lot going on here in Hillsborough County that's encouraging, and talk to people. And I think the other argument I would make is we live in a state that passed constitutional amendments for minimum wage. Yeah. Overwhelmingly, we passed a constitutional amendment for restoration of rights of people who've served their time. We overwhelmingly passed legislation on all sorts of environmental issues. I mean, these are all democratic issues. And so if that's where we are policy-wise, then we just have to figure out how to translate that into the ballot box and getting more candidates elected who are more aligned with how the people of Florida really feel.
Manny Diaz is the FDP chairman now. He just got elected. If you were talking to him, or if you've talked to him before, we don't know, but I'm just saying, if you were talking to him, what kind of messaging would you say for these candidates? I mean, you say you just spoke to Val Demings. I'm sure you know Charlie Crist with working with him. If he wins the primary, which I personally will be voting for him probably. That's the way I'm thinking right now. But if you were talking to these people, what would you tell them as far as candidates, for messaging wise? Because there was a lot of candidates I saw in 2020 that really didn't push that minimum wage message.
Well, yes. Yeah, yes. we won't name names here, but yes.
Right.
Now I'm biased because you know that I come from the world of finance and banking, and I work for one of the largest corporations in the country. And I think we as Democrats need to focus on the economic messages.
Agreed.
And a lot of our candidates I think a lot of our candidates, just because of their background or experience, just don't feel that comfortable talking about business issues. But this is a state we're a small business state. We're a state of entrepreneurs. And we as Democrats need to assure that, unlike the Republicans, who seem to be totally responsive only to large corporations and giveaways to large corporations, we need to be the champions for small businesses in this state, and to really listen carefully to, what do they want? They want to have an environment where they can be successful as business owners, and they can have, they have access to employees who are well educated. And where do we provide 90% of the education? Is public education in this state. And focusing on public education, not voucher giveaways to for-profit large corporations. And that's what we've experienced. So to me, that's our message, is that we want to build a quality of life for Floridians, which means clean air, clean water. We don't like our manatees dying. Yeah. Our state fish.
Right.
Because of lack of attention to environmental issues. But at the end of the day, it's all about create a good business environment where people can make a living wage, they can support their families, their children can get a good quality education. And if they want to start up a business, we're the best state in the whole country to start up a business. And we're going to focus on these issues of sea level rise and climate change.
Maybe you should be running some of these campaigns then.
Well, I am here to help. I am here to help many candidates. I decided, after 2014 that I didn't care to run myself again, that maybe the thing that I could do at this stage of my life, I'd rather get 30 Alexes out there rather than just me. So
sounds good to me.
I've got a great candidate right now, Ben Diamond, who's running for Congress
in Charlie's district.
Charlie Crist place, and Ben was my general counsel. He was involved in every single important issue that we dealt with that I mentioned.
Right.
Civil rights, environmental, insurance issues. I could go on and on. He's just fabulous and phenomenal, and he ought to be our next congressperson. So aside from Val Demings, Ben Diamond's he's my priority, along with many other candidates. I started Ruth's List, which is an organization to elect pro-choice Democratic women at all levels of government, starting with school board, city council, county commission. We recruit, we train, and hopefully we elect. And we have a good record of electing women at all levels of government. You mentioned Anna Escamani. We were with Anna super from the very beginning
she's
of
great.
her political career. and we want to see her go far. So that's what Alex Sink is doing right now. I'm helping not only a lot of women get elected, but men too. But share my background.
Oh, sorry, Alex. I just want to head to the last two questions. I appreciate your time. For people listening, again, this is Alex Sink, former CFO of Florida. This goes back to 2014, but I want to bring it back to 2022 as far as the race for governor. You ran against David Jolly back in 2014 in that special, I believe it was a special election. You can,
yes.
Okay. So running against him in that race, now he's, CNN contributor now, but now he's actually speaking about running for governor as a third party candidate, which very much scares me, because if you put somebody like Charlie Crist up against Ron DeSantis and you get these third party candidates, such as somebody like David Jolly, who is somewhat well known, I would say, he may take some of these independents from Charlie, which really could hurt him and hurt the Democratic Party in general. What is your take on that? Have you heard anything about him jumping into the race? I'm really concerned about that.
Yeah, I think we should be concerned about it. I have not heard anything recently. And I agree with you, Rob, that oftentimes these so-called independent candidates can really be spoilers. And I think that I agree with your assessment of what would happen if David happened to get in the race. And I hope he does not. There's no path to victory for him at all.
Right. Agree.
I mean, it's just not possible. And there's rarely a path to victory for anybody who's running as an independent anymore, for the most part, unless it's some weird situation like Lisa Murkowski in Alaska or Angus King in Maine. But I have a lot of respect for David, because he was certainly more than a worthy opponent in a district that turned out to be an overwhelmingly Republican district in the northern part of Pinellas County before it was redrawn. And the fact that he has shown himself to be a person of principle and come out very early on decrying the Donald Trump lies and lack of integrity, and we could go on, but I do have a lot of respect for David Jolly.
Okay. So I want to end with this question. Can you give the young viewers some hope? I mean, we've talked about Anna Escamati. I know you've helped her. Do you see any other young Democrats that are running for office now, or that are in the state legislature in general, that are really up and comers in the Democratic Party, even if they're not like 20 or 30, even if they're in their 40s, but they are really, progressive and trying to really move the Democratic Party in Florida forward?
Well, unfortunately, there are many. For many years, the rap on Democrats was that we didn't have a bench. And so that's partly why I started Ruthless 10 years ago. And you fast forward 10 years, and yes, we do have a bench, for sure. I'd say, I'll call out a few names, although there are many others, but right here in Tampa Bay, one of the next leaders of the House Democrats, it will be Fentress Driscoll. And she is an incredible, she's an African-American woman who got elected in a majority white district in the northwestern part of Hillsborough County, grew up in Lakeland, Florida, graduated from Harvard, was the first Black woman to serve as the head of the student government at Harvard, and then went into law school and came back to Tampa to practice law. She's in her late 30s, I believe, early 40s. And she worked with some of the Republicans in Tallahassee this very year and got some police reform legislation passed and signed by the governor. So she knows how to get things done. And she's just going to be an incredible leader for sure. There's another woman, Dottie Joseph, who's, I believe Dottie's Haitian American, also great educational background and a real leader out of that Miami group. And then, over in the Senate, we've got Janet Cruz, a Latina woman who's going to be up for a tough reelection because the Republicans don't like having competent Democrats in office. And so Janet's definitely going to be targeted. And my friend Loran Ausley, who's been in the legislature for many years, is now also a state senator representing a good part of the Panhandle in Tallahassee. I'm going to get myself in trouble, but there are many up and comer Democratic leaders that and obviously Anna is fantastic. And let's just keep our eyes on your generation. These are all people mostly in their 30s who are going to be our future leaders in this state.
Well, we need more. For people that are listening, and I thank you, Alex Sink, for coming on, former CFO of Florida. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Rob.
We appreciate it.
Good luck to you.